There wasn't really time for farewells after that. I had only a moment to, well, if you want to know the human word for it, they call it barking. My race has no word for hello or goodbye. We make a loud noise for either condition, and its decibel level tells you in context how we feel. Quick and sharp for annoyance, long and high for sadness, that sort of thing. But you aren't reading this to learn about me. My professor didn't really notice my farewell. He was busy catching up with his adoptive human family, and I didn't even see where my fellow students went as a crowd of people passed between the others, and I as I shuffled along with my hosts. Humans have a lot of crowds. That's unusual for even the most social species over the greater part of the galaxy. At least among intelligent races, my own for example, we create large labor centers for big projects, but otherwise we stick to small pack groupings of no more than 50 to 100 at a time. Among the more insectoid species, high number socialization begins early, but they rapidly isolate themselves early on until they connect via distant communication such as thread taps or long noise calls. But humans are not bound by the normal rules of logic that apply to other species. This family of three seemed utterly at ease moving through crowds of hundreds, though it is worth noting that their small human was carried at all times. This is very common among species wherein the young are ambulatory but not rational, and so are prone to self-harm, or where there are ample predatory dangers to be had. I knew enough to anticipate this and so said nothing, but what I wasn't prepared for was the child's abject curiosity. They studied everything, and in his soft blue eyes, I swear I could see them processing all the details around him. It was like watching a computer build itself. Humans are high-sensory beings, perhaps due to evolving as active predators. When their children are very young, their brains are not fully developed, at least not in the usual sense. Rather, they have the hardware of a brain, but the many neural connections form in their early years based on sensory information. The mother and father, I noted, made a bird-like cooing noise over their little one whenever it pointed something out and named it, praising every single thing, no matter how ordinary. This gentle care was very different than most predatory races. The Xenobians, for example, will beat their young to stimulate aggressive threat responses early on, subjecting them to violence and hardening their bodies against some of the fierce predators of their homeworld. Human infants, however, were very soft. If I could pick one word for them, it would be squishy. They are very warm and very squishy. This particular tiny human person seemed to find me to be of particular interest and stared at me a great deal. The only trouble was, at his particular age, he was not especially verbal. Tiny humans learn languages with shocking ease, but in their early stages of development, they use singular words, or at most pair words, which I will explain further when we reach the part dealing with nap time. However, despite their lack of verbal skills, they seem to understand far more than they can say, and make up for their lower verbalism with gestures. Adult humans, however, are very verbal. William, the male of my host family, was fairly tall, and I had to tilt my head to look up into his eyes when he spoke to me. Notably, he stood within reach, close enough for a handshake or a fight, but not quite close enough to embrace the way my professor did with the aged members of his host family. When our eyes met, after a lot of random confused staring by myself, he addressed me saying, "So, Bailey, are you really going to be with us for 50 years? I admit, I didn't really believe it when my grandfather said it would be that long. It's a generational study for a triple tier, what you call a PhD program. So, yes." I answered and I looked away, my tail lowered a little. A question like that felt doubtful, as if he wasn't sure about his decision any longer. "Is that a problem?" No. Jonathan quickly shook his head back and forth. "It came highly recommended by my grandfather, and we're really looking forward to it." William smiled at me when he said that, and here is where it gets complicated. You see, a human smile can be faked. A human can smile at you and not mean it, unlike other species that cannot deceive socially with things like alarm, happiness, anxiety, distaste. Humans can deceive with every social cue, and they frequently combine social cues together to deepen the deception. A smile may reveal a lie or conceal it, or it may be completely real. Or they can hug you and whisper words of sympathy while they secretly revel in your pain. It makes them very hard to read, as species go. In the end, I decided that at least on this occasion, William was speaking the truth. His head shake, smile, and above all, the haste in his voice were all things I'd seen in video entertainment that occurred when someone was trying to reassure someone. Quicker responses are harder to fake, and his response was instant. So my tail perked up, and I saw him relax. This highlights one of the things that makes humans so dangerous on the intragalactic community stage. They are masters of social cues and even alien races. If they can perceive it, they can understand it. And William concluded in mere minutes that my tail meant a rising sense of dejection, and immediately responded, relaxing when my drooping tail went back up. Since you're going to be with us for so long, Bailey, why don't you let us know how we can help you the most? Or what would you like to see? What would you like to do? And please don't worry about the cost. As long as we submit receipts, it's all paid for by the government. The world is your oyster as far as we're concerned. William cracked another smile at me. It seemed he was very eager to make me feel comfortable, but the way he said it brought up another lesson I should mention here. Your world is an oyster? Are you telling me that your species evolved on... No, that can't be right, I asked, my head cocked, and I scratched my left fore ears, and Rebecca began to laugh, while William tried very hard to restrain himself, but his chest was spasming, and he bit his lip to hold his laughter in. Doggy! Their little one shouted and stretched out his arms toward me again. It's an idiom, a kind of metaphor, an expression. It means you can do almost anything here because it's your home, like the way a pearl lives in an oyster. Rebecca explained through fits of chortling laughter that still fought free of her attempts at restraining it. Oh, I said, and nodded. But, why was that so funny? I asked, and both William and Rebecca reddened a little in the face. It wasn't, I'm sorry, but the way you looked at us, it was like dogs do when they're curious about something they've never seen before. And it was just... we couldn't help ourselves. I hope we didn't offend you. Rebecca said it as gently as she could, and my ears went down. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. It'll make more sense when you see dogs up close. William promised me, and then reaching out, he put his hand on my shoulder and applied a little pressure. Humans, it seems, love metaphors. So much of their communication is indirect, not only in the non-verbal sense, but they convey their meaning through analogies, metaphors, and symbols. You may recall stories about how when that human colony on Golga 4 was surrounded by Zenti pirates with no hope of relief for weeks rather than surrender, the humans renamed their colony Masada. The Zenti did not understand that this place in human history was a fortification where a last stand took place, where the defenders resolved to fight to the death or commit suicide rather than be captured. The Zenti's failure to understand human resolve and willingness to rally around a symbolic meaning alone, such as a flag, a name, a battle cry, was almost unlimited. As a result, the Zenti siege went on until the human fleet arrived in force and destroyed the pirates. Over 60% of the human colony's population was killed, but it was still theirs in the end. When studying humans, never underestimate the value of their symbolic words, deeds, references, or materials. One single symbol or hard-hitting slogan can revitalize the dying as if they were fresh to the fight. That may be a lot to say after a single explanation of metaphor use, but it applies so broadly that as you study this species further, you will return to this lesson again and again. I contemplated their question about what to do, and to be blunt, I was at a loss. I was expecting my hosts to give me instruction, not the other way around. While it wasn't unheard of to indulge a traveler or guest, humans are unnaturally, no, unusually, giving hosts. When they have taken you in, magnanimity is the word of the day. Sadly, my film studies hadn't let me catch this offhand. In retrospect, I now understand my initially poor grades in tests on visitor rituals. I lowered my tail and my ears and answered truthfully, I don't know. I have a long list of things, but what to do first? Where to begin? It's all so much. William clapped me on the back and put a spring into his step. His mate, his wife, moved a little closer to him, and he answered in a booming voice, Not to worry. If you have no idea what you're doing, you can't do it wrong. He chuckled and added, We'll take you home, get you settled first, and then work out what to do first. I got a few weeks of paid vacation coming, and I figured this might happen, so I submitted it last week, and it got approved starting today. Paid vacation? I asked him about this and scratched my head again, prompting the tiny human to reach for me once more, again shouting my incorrect species identifier. Yes, see, we realized long ago that the point of life isn't work. The point of life is to live it to its fullest. So while we do work a lot, at least relative to some of you all in the rest of the galaxy, to avoid creating a dystopian nightmare existence, We mandate 6 weeks of paid vacation time per year, not counting weekends and holidays. This was what William told me, but it was so strange that I still worry that I haven't recorded his words exactly, more my understanding of them. Still, he checked this portion of my manuscript himself early on and said it was close enough. I accepted his explanation mutely, and then we stepped out of the busy transit hub and into the light of day. Green was everywhere, trees on every corner, and there were many, many corners. You see, the humans planted flowering fruit trees everywhere in public, so that anyone who wants something fresh and healthy to eat can do so, even if they have no money. It is never considered theft, unless someone takes the fruit and intends to sell it. Humans require a high-calorie diet, and as such they eat more frequently than most other species we know of. Were they a fast-life organism with rapid reproduction of vast numbers of offspring? This would be a problem. However, humans are actually able to control their reproductive process through chemical and medical means, thus preventing overpopulation within families. The roads were laid out in a crisscross pattern, but at each intersection I could see, there was a circle about 10 paces circumference, which they referred to as roundabouts, or traffic circles. This allowed the motion of vehicles to continue unabated without dangerously swerving into oncoming lanes. An ingenious innovation that also kept the flow of people in constant motion without starts and stops. I was at once impressed by the scale of human architecture around it as well. The area in which we emerged gave a marvelous view of what they call skyscrapers, giant buildings of tempered glass set in steel frames. Each one could hold thousands of independent workers, almost like their ant colonies. See figure 6.4 for a few photos of ants and their habitats. The air was mainly composed of nitrogen, but what humans breathe is oxygen, a gas that is toxic, corrosive, and flammable. And yes, they breathe that stuff. In fact, it will eventually kill them by corroding the very lungs meant to take it in. Incidentally, they also exhale carbon dioxide, a gas that is deadly to them, and to most other life except for their plants. Their plant life inhales, sort of, carbon dioxide, and produces oxygen. Thus, not only have humans been widely referred to as death breathers, but also become renowned by ecologists of many species. They became masters of their environment in order to ensure that their production and use of both toxic gases did not throw their planet out of balance. My reverie about this was interrupted when William spoke up and said, "Wait here. I'll get the car." I watched him walk away, and when he was at a bit of a distance, I asked Rebecca, "Is there a reason we do not simply follow him to it? Some ritual or law that doesn't allow more than one to go inside at a time?" She hefted the young boy in her arms, bouncing him off of her hips, and said, "No, nothing like that. I'm just handling Michael here, so it's easier for me to wait and for him to walk to the car. He was being polite and helpful. He's that kind of man." Rebecca explained this to me with, "I suppose you could call it a note of pride." Humans take great pride in certain things, traits of their personality, much like their artisans over their work, as if to shape themselves is itself a work of art as surely as any sculptor shapes a statue. That pride in turn is shared with one another as a kind of communal feast. Rebecca was proud of William, as the tie to him was also a reflection on her own merit as a person. It created a very interesting social dynamic that I have never found in another race other than mankind. I didn't understand this right away. I jumped only to the cold calculation of an academic. So, it is a caloric preservative. You work less, thus have more energy to care for your offspring. She frowned a little, and if she could have lowered her ears or stiffened a non-existent tail, I think she would have. "I do work. Lots. I'm not lazy." My ears drooped. I had insulted her without meaning to. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply anything negative. I'm only trying to understand these things. It's strange to me." Thankfully, she too had learned to read my body language, and I knew what to say to express remorse, and she quickly settled down. "Of course, you meant in this specific moment, not in general?" She clarified, and I quickly wagged my tail. Her face brightened a little, and she further added, "I guess it is kind of like that. We probably wouldn't ever say it that way, but yes, I get less tired if I don't have to haul our son around. We help each other out. If he were holding our son, I would get the car." "Oh, so the human division of labor is based in part on who is doing what at any given time?" I asked. I was instantly intrigued, and little pieces of information from the video replays started to click into place. "Yes. If I'm bathing Michael, William will be making dinner. If I sweep, he will mop. We're a team, and we work in pairs to lighten both each other's burdens and make each other's lives easier. When Michael gets older, he'll start getting chores too. Rebecca explained it as patiently as if I were her student, and in a way, I was. I clearly had much to learn about human social dynamics, and by the time the car, a rectangular black thing with 4 black rubber wheels on it, rolled out in front of us, I was already thinking of just how much I still had ahead of me to understand. But I had to ask, so does that mean I'll get chores? Well, she looked me up and down. I mean, no offense, but I suspect you shed, and I'd appreciate it if you at least took care of that. It was a year before I knew why I heard William laughing inside the car. Would you like me to roll down the window, Bailey? William's question struck me as odd, because I was thinking exactly that as I watched the cars pass by, humans didn't use hover cars for city driving. They were considered far too dangerous. Instead, they were confined to combat equipment, wilderness riding, and ships where Insta-Shield security was available. But riding in this car with William, Rebecca, and Michael, I was reminded of my time in the hover car on the ship we were on, oh so briefly, and the wild ride I had that was supremely enjoyable. The question he asked was so unexpected that for a moment I thought I had missed some indication that humans were mind readers. I dismissed that, of course, and immediately replied, "Yes." "Told you," he said to Rebecca in the front passenger seat, though what it was he told her I never knew. I mostly forgot anyway as he hit the button and the window disappeared. I stuck my head out, opened my mouth, and felt my ears blow back, and it was wonderful. The blast of cool wind hit me full in the face, and I was thrilled beyond measure. So much so that I let out a cry of utter happiness. It felt so good that as soon as I was able to do so, I sent a dispatch home telling the engineers that they should disable the inertial nullification device that made all vehicles appear to be stationary despite being in motion, and increase the speed limit by double its then current standard in order to improve the quality of life for our entire species. They named it Bailey's Law after me, when after substantial testing, they found that it was absolutely marvelous. I held my head out the window the entire way, and completely forgot all of the conversational interviews I had planned before I arrived. My hearts pounded in sync in my chest, and it was all I could do to keep from fainting from happiness. The sun warmed my fur, not pounding the earth like the hammer of a desert sun on Danik Prime, or avoiding the world like the tiny dot of a sun seemed to on the dwarf planet of the humans' Plutonian colony. This truly was the sweet spot of their solar system. But all good things must come to an end. It is an unending truth of life, even for the long-lived. And my first ride in a human car with my hosts came to a close 30 of their minutes later when we pulled in front of a small 2-story home. I should note that the houses were split only by a few paces, and where some houses had 1 occupant, others had 2, 3, or even 6 or more. Made of a mix of rough-cut stone and wood, I had a good idea of human middle-class neighborhoods before, but the experience was something else. Almost every home had a garden visible from the front door, and each front door had a front porch. It seemed useless at first. See figure 6.5 for examples. It wasn't refrigerated, so you couldn't store food there. It had no defenses, and wasn't large enough to live on, not based on what I knew of humans at least. But it did have something else. A swing. A wide bench suspended by a pair of chains and painted a bright shade of red. It swayed back and forth in the breeze. 2 smaller seats made of woven wood and with thick green cushions sat beside one another looking out, and a small table sat where each of the occupants of those seats could reach it. Something about it all. I don't know what it was, but it was just so damn inviting. It screamed, "Come and sit." And I felt instantly drawn to it, like a Slitherian raptor's prey summoning call. "Do you like the porch swing?" William asked when he saw me staring at it. "I made that, you know." He confided and wore a smug grin on his face, and I could only nod. "It looks great." I wasn't quite sure how to praise it because I didn't understand why I liked it so. It was just wooden planks pieced together, but maybe it was the whole scene. I would have to experience more to know for sure. "Rebecca, would you be a love and put on some coffee?" William asked as she got their child out of the back seat. "My back is still sore from finishing up the room this morning, and I could do with a few minutes off my feet." "Of course," she said. "I'll just put Michael down and see if Fove is feeling better. It'll be just a few minutes." "That's fine, thanks much," William said, and putting his hand in the middle of my back, he gestured to the porch. "Come on, have a seat," he offered. I must admit, You may have expected me to tell you immediately what the porch was for, and I held it back to let this all play out in sequence. But now we come to the moment, and it was shockingly simple. We climbed the handful of stone steps up to the stone porch. He waved me to the gently swaying swing, and I sat down. The force of my seating myself immediately made it rock a little bit harder, and with the light breeze in the air, it proved to be easily one of the simplest delights I've ever experienced. Who knew? Nobody in my homeworld, it seemed. Or if anyone did, they kept that secret to themselves. William sat down with a groan and spread his arms out over the back of his woven long seat, a thing they call sofas or couches, and crossed one leg over the other. Just then, a man of coal dark skin and a curious kind of fur on the top of his head, far more solid-like, I suppose, than William's wavy straight hair, exited a car that pulled in across the street. "Hey, Tuna!" William waved, and the fishman, or so I immediately thought of him, given what he'd just been called, stopped and waved back. The shouted greeting was answered less than immediately. As the tuna man approached the house, it wasn't until he reached the middle of the stairs that he answered back and said, "Willie, you got a dog, no?" He blinked his dark amber eyes when he looked me up and down, and I shook my head. "I'm not a dog, I'm a dlamisa. Are you a landfish?" I asked, and cocked my head. "Where is your tail? Do fish here have legs?" The tuna person snapped his fingers and gave his head a rapid shake, as if waking himself up out of a dream. "Oh, right, the alien you told me about." He addressed William, and when William gestured to another seat, Tuna sat down. "No, he is not a fish or a tuna. That is his nickname." William corrected me. "His last name is Latunde. He's from Nigeria, not the Pacific Ocean, and we served together in Germany when I was in the service." "So, you are not a fish, and your profession is nickname? What does that do? Do you give names to human offspring?" I asked, and the dark-skinned man, who was evidently not a fish after all, looked at me and scratched his head. "Man, is he serious?" "No, of course he is. He's an alien. Duh." The one called Latunde answered his own question, and I scratched my ears and cocked my head at him. It seemed to make William and the other two happy when I did that, and it appeared to work just as well on the newcomer as he broke into a toothy grin. "No, a nickname is what friends call each other. My first name is Mark. I got the nickname Tuna back in the service because we all went by last names, and my friends just shortened it. Better than the guy named Douche." "Hey, Willie, remember Douche?" Mark Latunde laughed, and his arm darted out and the back of his hand struck William's bicep. The grin on William's face grew wider. I have to pause to explain something here about what I learned from this short interaction. Porches are for socializing. That is their purpose. They are an invitation to come and sit, and all are designed to look welcoming. They are a physical expression of the human need to form bonds, to add to one of their greatest strengths. The other thing I must add is that humans who live to their middle years love to reminisce. Their memories, especially those shared with friends, become treasures. If you offered a man money for his fondest memories, he would live under a bridge in poverty and want before he would give them up. They are storytellers and spend their lives creating the tales they will tell. This ties back into their love of metaphor and symbolism. Every story becomes an example, either to live up to or to take heed of as a warning. I listened while they told each other things they each already knew about things that had come and gone many years before. Apparently, copious amounts of alcohol were involved, along with dancing, and a man not quite ready for manhood, along with a woman. To be frank, it involved much of the late adolescent male activities, and these would be an entire thesis by themselves. Apparently, males of a particular age are prone to competitiveness that does not always leave one's dignity intact. The two finally stopped their rapid chattering when Rebecca re-emerged holding a tray with 4 cups made of glass sitting on it. From out of the cups rose a thick steam that had all 8 of my ears pricking up at attention, and I leaned forward to inhale it as deeply as I could. "What is that wonderful smell?" I asked, and Rebecca set the tray down on the table. While she passed out the cups, she answered me. "It's called coffee, and it is marvelous. We use it to stay alive." Rebecca answered as Mark and William gratefully offered thanks and accepted their cups with deep inhales of the aroma that were as enthusiastic as my own. "You'll die without this? Should I really have some?" I asked, and stared down at the substance that smelled like liquefied paradise. "No, not really, but you will feel more alive," Rebecca answered and took her seat beside William, leaning her side against his. "Oh, and by the way, I run the big pet store down the road, so If you need to bulk buy any food, I'm your guy, Mark said with a smirk while he looked at me. Well, I've had most of the planet's main food supply analyzed. I can't eat your grapes or chocolate, but there are a lot of things I can eat, so I'll try anything once. I didn't come here just to sit around, I replied, and when they all took deep sips of their coffee, I imitated them all. I will never forget how it tasted, nor how it felt to sit with them all. Mark, apparently an old friend of the family as I've now explained, would prove just why he was one when hard times came, and I learned a lot about humanity from him. Not all the days ahead would be perfect. The human experience is a mixed one, but you can learn a lot about a people, about a person, by how they handle their darkest days, and a lot about yourself, by how you handle those who endure those times. I know I did, at least. I conclude my talk of their little porch in that little neighborhood on that little bit of dust in the sun that was their world, by saying that it was delightful. From the coffee to the confusions, to a casual first introduction to yet another person I would soon call a very good friend, I had fun, and if you listen to most humans, that's the point of it all. Whether you agree with me or not right now, I cannot even begin to guess, but save your judgment till the end, as there is a human lifetime still to tell, and it would take 10 lifetimes of even my vast years to tell it all.